right now I want to introduce Eric Fullerton. Hi, Eric. He's from Acquia, and I've been very interested in Acquia and learned a lot over the last couple of months. And this just might be me, but I almost think of Acquia as one of the more compelling providers of a solution for higher education that you've never heard of. At least some of the folks on this call, perhaps, based on where they are. So Eric, if you could begin by describing your solution and correct me. I mean, I've learned about DXPs, I've learned about CDPs, and I see, it kind of goes back and forth. But one of the things I've learned is they are actively deployed at campuses today, which fascinated me. So if you could let's start out by level setting with the group here. What are we talking about, and how is it deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the term DXP, or digital experience platform, is an evolution of the web content management space. And really, at the most basic level, that's how you build and create a website. Now, lots of things, as I think folks will probably this will resonate. There's the requirement for websites and for digital properties is evolving and changing, and we're no longer creating these kind of static web pages or landing pages. There's lots of different types of content to create, interactive experiences to launch and deliver, and that's really what the term and phrase DXP comes from, which is an expansion of how you traditionally create and build a website, and then bring that really beyond into maybe multiple different channels, being able to create content and publish it to multiple different locations. And then also when you think about the delivery and then the optimization of content online. The way I kind of think about it at the most basic level is a DXP helps an organization digitally transform. And it's a set and suite of solutions. So it is web content management. It could be personalization technology, could be marketing automation, analytics, A/B testing. So it's kind of this smorgasbord of different capabilities that will help an organization create and launch experiences online and deliver them to multiple different channels. And I mean, I can probably speak to our solution specifically. So just for those who may or may not know, Acquia is a company. We were founded about 13 years ago, and we essentially are helping to build and create experiences online, but primarily using Drupal. So Drupal is an open source content management system, and we help keep that secure. We make that easier. We help provide the support. And there's a long history of open source technology, and Drupal specifically, in higher ed, and where we have lots of different customers in higher ed who we've been working with for quite some time. I'm happy to go off on a little bit of a list here, but Stanford uses us, UCLA, Yale, University of Virginia, Kent State, Babson, Dartmouth, Berklee College of Music, George Washington, Rice. There's we have a large customer base in higher ed. We've been working with higher ed for some time, and we're kind of working through the expansion beyond how do I create a site, or how do I create multiple different properties, and then how do I create kind of an immersive digital experience for my students or for my alumni or for faculty and staff and things like that.
So I think, I mean, that was part of the surprise to me, but it makes sense, and I found it compelling because it matches what was already starting to happen. But I think it's fair to say the convergence that COVID was a catalyst for, by driving a much bigger virtualized online presence. Right. And I have to believe that has had an impact on your customer base and on your roadmap. Earlier in the day, I know you couldn't join us, but we went through a succession of folks talking about whether it's learning technology, whether it's engagement, et cetera, the need for to really take a hard look and apply discipline to a customer journey. We now can call students customers. That's okay. People don't take offense at that. And that's how I found my way to some of the seminars and material that you put out there. So um, now nonetheless, there's all these content repositories and this ability to manage the constituent data and engagement on the right technology platform. And I think this, again, I find this really interesting that DXP was more or less engineered to solve that problem fundamentally and out of the gate. It's not an afterthought. It's a purpose-built enterprise solution. If you could correct me or fill that out a little more for the group here.
Yeah, around like defining DXP and capabilities that sit within it, or just like what, like I mean, it's essentially, if you can think about content online, one of the things that's really interesting for us now is that we have dozens of customers who have hundreds of different sites on our platform in higher ed specifically. But what's starting to become really interesting is the move from the traditional, hey, I've got a website and I've got an alumni page and I've got a student page and I've got a faculty portal or whatever you may have, is all the different ways and instances that you can use and create a digital experience. We're seeing content being created and then maybe published to multiple different channels. So we have some customers actually use us like to create content and on their website, but then also can publish it to a sign or to a digital kiosk. And it's really about having, like, when we say purpose built, it's it's the ability to interoperate and to integrate with a emerging type of technology. So making sure that you have whatever that new tool or tech may be, whether that's something that's homegrown that you've actually created, or you have a team that's a database system or a management system internally, or you have your own forum for student interaction, or whether you're trying to figure out how to deliver content via voice or wearable, you want to have the ability to do that. And it's really at the core level, and it can get a little bit technical, but in order to expand the experience to multiple channels, you have to have that interoperability, because essentially if you don't, everyone's just going to, you create your content online, and then it sits in that one place. And if you wanted to do something on for email, then you have to recreate that content, and it would be then repository in that specific email system. Or if you have a student portal or a faculty portal that sits there, and you kind of all have all of these like pieces of content and pieces of data that sit everywhere. And ideally you want to be able to have more people accessing that, creating that, and unifying that in one specific platform.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of higher ed in a nutshell. And I think in some ways it's just this latest wave where higher ed has realized what price they're paying by allowing these silos to develop that are very focused, and maybe they are focused on an experience and content, but it's within a specific business process that can always be resolved. I mean, back in the day, it could always be resolved by walking around campus. Now that's not an option anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think when I think of DXP as something that in effect, when I say purpose built, it's in that higher ed context where now higher ed is saying, oh, wow, I've got these different silos and repositories and data sources, and now I think I need a unified customer journey. How the heck do I do that? And that's where the purpose-built aspect of DXP comes into play, and I think is so compelling here. And the idea of focusing on the user experience almost of other applications. And I hope I'm not oversimplifying that, but could you, like, for example, could you talk about what you've already built in terms of interoperability that's applicable to campuses as well as commercial entities?
Sure. I think that there's kind of a couple ways we could go and talk about that. But when we think about interoperability, because we have origins in open source technology, what that means is organizations like, so if you're in higher ed tends to, there's kind of certain disciplines that tend to prefer open source technology, and Drupal's an open source project. There's thousands of different developers who contribute to that. And what's good is rather than when you choose a vendor that's proprietary or something like that, what this means is that they have a roadmap and they deliver capabilities and features and solutions. But open source means that anyone can contribute and deliver value to a project. So we have people that are Drupal developers at specific organizations, and they can actually create different types of forms. They can create different connectors. They can create what's called modules, and they can actually release that into the open. So, and it's we have a team and an organization who manages it and secures it and protects it and everything like that. But for example, in order to do a certain connector for a higher ed use case, you'd actually release that into the open source community, and then other universities and colleges can use that same type of tool and technology to create content online, to do a type of form, to be able to build an integration with something like a Teams or a Zoom, because you're not relying on only your team or only one technology provider to do that. And we see that, coming in terms of, from a value perspective, that's one of the reasons higher ed seems to use and see the value in open source technology, because they're not the only ones innovating. They're actually able to take advantage of other innovation and, kind of not copy, but emulate and use some of the resources that and tools and technologies that other universities have already done and done well.
Right, right. And I think, well, we just came out of sessions with Salesforce and Microsoft, and I was trying to find the list. I saw a list of your available connectors for all the different products out there, and it surprised me to what degree things are ready to go.
Right. Yeah, so for the newest version of Drupal, just specifically, and we have lots of solutions outside of what we do with Drupal, but I mean, we have 5,500 pre-built connectors out of the box for the newest version of it. And that's all secured and maintained by the community. So you have the ability to, one of the things that organizations or teams have to, like, that takes a lot of time and a lot of money, is like actually building an integration. It's a lot of dev work. There's a lot of requirements. Then you have to actually maintain an integration. And by integration, I could be talking about pulling data from some type of student data repository, or pulling content from one place that it could exist on the web or maybe on email, like that. That's what that connection means. And it's really trying to have that integrated ecosystem of technology so that things aren't siloed off, because usually you're making decisions when you're buying or building something. You're like, I need to solve this problem. And that's good, because you obviously need to solve your specific problem, and maybe you want to create a portal to do that. But you also have to think about the larger experience and how that fits in with any other tools or technology that you should be focused on. So
yeah, and I wanna tee off that next, but and in the context of this higher ed vertical, it's what do I need to do, and who else is doing this?
Yeah.
And can I, is there a community there? That is a big factor. There's a very small handful of institutions that are really going to go out there and forge something they're going to deploy at the enterprise level without having peer institutions or some sense of community they can fall back on.
Yeah.
But I think so. You've got you service multiple verticals. You have a wide customer base, and I think another trend that was already underway with higher education was starting to look outside the vertical to say, how do we drive compelling experiences, particularly for the digital natives, the millennials, et cetera. And I think I'd love to get your thoughts about some of the fundamentals around what I'll call a modern digital experience, and managing that higher ed really should embrace and build their own capacity. I think there's the journey mapping discipline, there's the methods, there's how to look at data, the products, et cetera, to meet these consumer expectations. If based on what you've seen and how you interact, do you have some perspective on that? And it could come from the commercial sectors, that's fine, who's really compelling.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we learned a lot over the past year is this requirement to, the way I think about overall, like, quote unquote digital experience, is there's really two aspects of it. There's content, that's the how people engage, the actual physical piece of content that you're looking at. And when I say content, that could be an email, that could be a paragraph that sits on a website, that could be an image. Content is this all immersive term for anything that is in the digital space, right? And then the other piece of that is data. And this is where many organizations are a little bit behind, because this problem of customer data, student data, whatever the way you want, however you want to frame it, it's really hard to understand your users and their behavior and their activity, especially when they're engaging with you on multiple different channels. And this is where we think about something like customer data platforms. Organizations are building data lakes. They're trying to figure out how to unify that data in that system. And the two areas that we've seen organizations make progress are around the content and the data piece. That's kind of some of the areas we help with as well. So one kind of cool example, and I can just throw out some other cool customer like examples that we have, because we have some people doing some pretty cool stuff in higher ed too as well, and I can mention some of those. But there was one example, and I say this example all the time, but we work with a company called Mars Wrigley, of course. So they're big in candy, and they're big in many different things in consumer packaged goods. But we were working with them, and it was like June of last year, and they're kind of like their number one holiday, the number one way their revenue generation is Halloween. And people are obviously going out to people's houses, and they're kind of doing trick or treating. And Mars is a pretty smart digital team. They're looking at a couple months in advance and saying, this is going to be a very big problem for our business and for our bottom line. We need to figure out how to try to bring some of this virtual. So what they did is they used our platform. They use it for their website today. But what they did is they created this immersive app experience. It's called Treat Town. And you essentially have like an entirely virtual Halloween experience. So that was like, you'd like create a little avatar for yourself. You'd pop around to different houses. You get all these deals and coupons and things like that. And then it helped them because obviously more people were buying candy. They would, you can kind of go to the store the next day and, cash in on all the different things that you received and experience. But what was cool is that they were able to create that content once. That content, some of it already lived in their website, and they just totally repurposed it to build their app. So they were able to build this app in like 3 months versus normally, this would take them years, and they'd have to use some new system, go through a whole buying process. So it's like, how do you use the tools you have today, wanting them to be flexible, to be able to integrate with other solutions? I always think that's kind of a cool example for kind of someone outside of that sector in that space. But even like for folks who are familiar, I don't know if you've seen this on Netflix now, but the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, that's a museum out here in Boston, and which is where I'm located. There's a new.
Oh yeah, I just watched that.
Heist. Yeah. So wicked good Boston accents, that type of stuff. So I've heard it's pretty good, but it's famous for this massive heist that took place a couple years ago. But imagine being in a museum, and everyone on the call probably had a very similar experience. The only way you can interact with anyone is they come into the museum. The only way you teach your teaching is you're in the classroom. And then all of a sudden overnight that completely flipped on its head. So they actually worked with us to create an entirely virtual experience for their museum. And they were able to kind of have this like virtual mapping for like all the different types of exhibits and stuff like that. So it was never quite the same, in the same way that teaching a class on a Zoom call will never be quite the same, but they were able to kind of get some semblance of that interaction. And then they were able to kind of push them to the donation page and the store that you would go to, that they force you to go into at the end of each museum, and now you kind of feel a little bit like, well, I'm sure they're struggling. So maybe they actually did pretty well in terms of getting a good amount of donations in that period of time. But again, they built that in just a couple months, which is something that's really difficult to do. The University of California, San Francisco is another one that we worked with. And for them, they tried to position themselves as an educational resource for their students, but really beyond, right? Because they were doing a lot of studies and they were trying to do a lot of research on coronavirus and the rapidly evolving outbreak. So what they were able to do with our platform is they actually created this brand new site and this fully dedicated page and experience with all this information about infection control. And they're providing it to clinicians, they're providing it to different people in different hospitals, providing it to their students. So they were actually able to spin up this entirely new site just a couple of days. Same thing, actually, like we work with the state of New York, and they built out, I mean, because the demand for them overnight for the primary place people got information about the pandemic, they created this brand new page. It took them 3 days to actually create an entirely new page and site and experience that was their coronavirus resource center. So that's kind of like the content piece of it. And one of my big areas of focus is around low code solutions, right? So low code meaning maybe it's no code, but essentially oftentimes you have technology that's trapped in only the developers or only the people who are experts. And one of the things we want to focus on is how we can have more people across an organization creating content online and being able to contribute to that digital work without having it just be isolated in one specific team. And maybe certain things should be isolated, and that's okay. And you also want to make sure that no one has this, this freewheeling ability to create and publish anything at any time, but you can set some rules and permissions so that one team can actually create their a new site or create content, update a specific page. And this stuff has always been so siloed in organizations that that area is something that we've seen in the time when they really need to pivot, build stuff really fast. They couldn't go through the traditional cycles to do so, and we're able to spin up new sites and properties really quickly. I can talk about data in a little bit too, but I wanted to. That was a long answer, so.
No, it was good and very very relevant to the moment and the situations, including all of the examples you raised. I particularly like the Mars one because my birthday's on Halloween, so now you're all going to remember my birthday.
Yeah.
But Matt has his hand up.
Subtle, but I like it.
Yeah. Let him ask a question. You're on mute, Matt.
Yeah, and this digital journey thing, there's this traditional journey that we've all been kind of linear kind of thing. Campuses have to rethink this, right? They have to think about what that journey will look like. So that's the first question. And I see Christine from Lucid from Minerva, and I'd maybe pose this question to her because her journey for her campus is different. It's a totally different campus. It's a different set of cohorts. It's a different set of people who come into it. Their purpose is different. Christine, if you want, can you chime in just a little bit so these guys can understand what Minerva is? And then two, how does a digital journey get designed for a school like yours, which is really different than the traditional linear path? I'd love to get your take.
So,
or your dog's take too. You know what? I see that he's been visiting us through the day.
We'll see if the dog wants to make another appearance. He likes to jump in unannounced. But he's got a bone right now. So Minerva is a super weird startup university that is part accredited, students are getting a real degree, part tech company that built a platform for the university. And what our student experience is for the undergrads is that they apply, it's a 4-year degree, they spend their first year in San Francisco, and then the whole cohort of them picks up and they move to a different global city every semester for the next 3 years. So they go Berlin, Buenos Aires, Seoul, Hyderabad, London, Taipei, and then back to San Francisco to graduate. And the reason they can do this is because all of their classes happen online on purpose, way before COVID. We built a digital university. And so there's a dashboard for async work, and the classroom is built in there. And we have better features than Zoom. But really what makes it special is that the experience is consistent across these different geographic locations. So faculty can live wherever they want. Students are moving around in this group. They have that community benefit that you get for going to a 4-year degree program. And then what we get on the faculty side is really, really consistent data on learning outcomes. So that's the model for student journey. And then the educational side of that is that in their first year, we introduce them to, I think at this point it's 76, we call them habits of mind and foundational concepts. They're these durable, transferable skills that we think will be useful no matter where students go during their sort of concentration that they do after the first year or into jobs in the future. And we actually use our platform to track those learning outcomes throughout the curriculum. So everyone leaves first year knowing that regression is important to see how variable X predicts variable Y. Everybody leaves knowing to look for historical context. Everyone leaves knowing what systems thinking is. And then when I get them senior year and they're working on brand experiments, they're using those same concepts in my class and I'm grading them on them, and it revises their freshman year grades at the end of their senior year. And so we're really trying to do this scaffolded learning journey. And that's actually why they travel, because our North Star, the thing we're trying to design for, is transfer. We want people to see how one tool can be used in lots of different ways, how one experience you can have will look in lots of different places. And we've designed technology that supports that on the education front, and then a global rotation that supports that on the student experience front. Matt, did that answer your question?
Yeah. I got a bunch of reaction on Nick's face, Eric's face, while you're going through that a little bit, like a little bit. I love because you gave the example.
Weird to hear about for the first time.
Yeah, you gave the example of the Halloween thing, and that's the first thing I thought, because universities have to rethink something right away at some point in time. Minerva is just totally on the other side of what most campuses would do. And so that's why, Eric, I was saying, where does her journey for her students reside? Because the traditional is this, but in the example of the Halloween, you guys had to rethink the engagement layer of those of those children, really, right? Or their parent, right? It's two of those.
Right.
Yeah, I just thought it was a cross. Yeah.
It's cool. Eric, we should connect. One of the things that I'm finding really interesting is I started by saying we're both a university and a tech company. So now we're starting to do partnerships with other schools. We're doing partnerships with corporations. We have a high school arm. And what we're seeing is a lot of people are treating COVID kind of like a Band-Aid. They want to put a Band-Aid on COVID. They're like, how can I use your platform until we go back to the thing that we did forever? And I'm just like, wait, that's not the point. Like, this digital tool actually has all of this outcome assessment baked in, and it gives people a new lens, and you can do these things that you can't do in a real classroom. Like, we just want your software. No. And so it's been a really weird experience to try and help people see that you're not just trying to replicate real life in a digital space, you're really trying to design for a new kind of experience.
So there may not be, I'm not sure there's a question there per se, so feel free to comment, Eric. I did want to come back to a sort of a practical question before we move on, but.
Yeah, I mean, no, I was just super interested, so I was just listening. I thought it was, but it kind of reminds me, like, the approach is, we have these constant threads for the student experience and for the technology experience, but that kind of hybrid model to learn how you can use one type of technology or one platform, maybe for something that it was designed for, and then use that in actual multiple different ways. And that's kind of where, like, the stories that I was kind of telling, that's kind of where we're going. This is kind of coming at it from this different angle, and I see like some levels of convergence there. So my mind was just kind of,
one question.
Yeah.
I could make it a real question if I have a second. Do you see that similar thing? People see digital as just this thing that we need, but it's not really purpose driven? Or are you getting more clients who actually see the promise of it?
So we have about 4,000 customers. So they vary very, very greatly depending on their type of digital maturity or like what their goals are. So someone might say, hey, we want to build like Shake Shack. They're like, we want to build an app. We want to build an app for curbside pickup. And that's good. But that's like one part of the journey. Some people say we want to host thousands of different sites and properties and have it be the one platform. Like, we work with Bayer and J&J and Moderna to build their entire digital experience. And sometimes they'll be like, hey, I need someone to host my web page. And we're like, so maybe we're not the best fit for you to do that, right? If you want to think about the transformation of a individual experience online. And like, I kind of like what you said, where it's almost, we're not trying to replicate the experience, the in-person experience online. We're trying to create a new hybrid model and path. We see this in retail moving very, very quickly, where we're going in, there's kind of these pilot stores where you can go in and see digital signs. You can, on your wearable, you're getting different content that's sent to you for, and like someone's able to come up and personalize your experience. You can actually try things on without having to physically try them on. So there's really interesting stuff going on in retail. But that reminds me, it's like this hybrid approach where there's a fusion of digital and physical. And that's kind of where we see things moving. Those tend to be our most sticky and longest tenured type of customers, as you might imagine,
Yeah, that makes sense.
versus someone who's like, I have a website and I want to put it on the cloud, which is still a good thing. But those are the goals are like, and when we have a customer or prospect who comes in and talks to us, we'll say, what are the tools you use today? What is a digital roadmap that for like what you want to accomplish? And like, what are the things you would need to get there? And that includes staffing, that includes your team. That's not about like buying a bunch of products. There's a lot of procedural things and strategy pieces to that too. So it varies a little bit greatly. And I think but our most successful customers tend to be the ones who are using us to actually transform their experience. And some are using it for internal activities as well. So like employee experience portals and things like that. So you can use one platform to have a website, to have a blog, to have an entire employee portal. You can use one platform to do all of these different things. And then you start to add things like automation on top of that, or content recommendations for machine learning or personalization. And then we start to get into this kind of whole new ecosystem of how we would communicate and interact with employees and consumers and I guess the public at large. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that that's a great near wrap up, because that's what drew me in as I was writing this article, whatever you want to call it, about looking at learner experience, digital experience, constituent relationship, and how DXP was pulling those things together into this purpose-built stream. And I think on the other side of that, given the COVID context, the other premise we put out there is, well, you've got to do some level of transformation, reactive or otherwise, because you're moving online. But guess what? If you optimize around the online experience, your customers, by and large, that if optimizing for that experience is just optimizing for the experience they expect going forward, in-person, online, hybrid, whatever, that is the mindset of the subsequent generations that you need to serve. And so there's like no downside. There's no going back. If you think about going back, you're missing the point.
Right.
And so how do you do that? And who are the entities out there, the providers, the thought leaders, or whatever, that have gone through that process in a complex environment of a large corporation, or something that can translate into the reality of a virtual campus. Now, having said that, I want to close and give you just a chance to clarify a couple of things. Back to the tactical, because I think a lot of folks on this call equate customer data with CRM, and even a few years ago, maybe they didn't. They thought of it as their student information system, their learning management system. So if you could, there's these customer repositories and there's functionality. If you could say, well, this is what we are and what we are not relative to those, as just a point of orientation.
Sure. So there's this interesting, like you said, there's this landscape where we have CRMs, there's data lakes, we have like DMPs, you maybe have an MSP, which is like a marketing service provider, so a company who would organize all these things. Then you have, of course, your own database. There's all these different aspects of data. And one thing we're hearing a lot about, we have an offering around this in a customer data platform. And what a customer data platform does is it connects to multiple different systems. It pulls information into one specific system. What those systems could be a CRM, it could be a database, it could be a student information center, it could be any type of technology. Also, it could be something that is an online or an offline experience as well. And then what it does is actually takes all these records. So I can give you an example. We work with Lululemon, and they use us for our customer data platform. They brought in all these different data points and records. They had 68 million records for all their different customers. So they're like, yeah, we have 68 million customer records online. But when we brought that into our system from multiple different places, we were actually able to resolve these identities. So you can do things like matching different emails or profiles or different aspects of an individual's profile. And these are all known users too that I'm referring to numbers wise. So you're actually able to resolve these, kind of cleanse this data. And what they actually found is that they had 18 million customer records. So when you go through this engine, they essentially found out that they were essentially sending 3 times too many emails, sending out 3 times too many discount offers, et cetera, et cetera. So what a customer data platform does is it takes insight from other sources, it cleanses that data with things like identity resolution. I can get a little more technical on that, but I won't for the sake of this combo. And then it's actually models that data into an actual single view of your customers. So right now, our customers can go into our tool and they can actually click on an individual and they can see all the information about them. And they just, not just the people who are using the UI, like they have people at call centers who can go in, someone calls them, they can see their customer information, they can see how much they've spent with them, their email, like get all this insight about them. And then the next piece of this is using a model or an algorithm to identify and recommend, like, what's their likelihood to convert to something, to engage with something? What's the likelihood, if we take this to your specific example in higher ed, it could be based on a student's engagement in the application process. What's their likelihood to apply? Or what's their likelihood to attend? And you'd be able to measure and model specific types of behavior based on that. So it's where things start to get really, really interesting in that space. But that's a customer data platform. It is different than a CRM, different than a DMP, different than a data lake. But it is a very, I'm happy to provide more context or insight around this. I have a bunch of documents that and explainers, because the data space is super confusing. Everyone's trying to say that they can do all these specific things. And there's a lot of demystifying in the data space today that we're working through. So thanks for the opportunity to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I think you have a white paper out there. That's one of the things I pulled down. That if you can provide that, we'll make sure that the folks that registered for this event get pointed to it, because that helped clarify things for me.
Yeah, and just from an educational perspective too, I think we're only going to hear more. There's only more terms that like analyst firms and we see that people throw out as that they're trying to create this. They're trying to move the digital needle forward, and there's almost like this like dictionary to actually describe what some of these things actually mean, and we can provide some context of what these these technological tools and terminology means as well. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, the acronyms just they never stop.
They never stop. They do it on purpose, I think, just to make themselves smart.
They want to feel special. They want to feel special. And I think the biggest challenge is they don't see themselves as a business at times. And so because they don't see it, they kind of limit their view of how the digital journey for a student is. They don't think as creative because they just think they just got to educate them. And there's way more than that.